Hello and welcome back to the Stronghold. I'm the Magi and welcome to Midweek Magic, where I want you to grow your collection by winning 2 free rare or better ICRs each and every week. This Midweek Magic is one of the old school arena classics, the one and only historic Pauper. It used to be that we'd see this just about every season, so 4, 5, 6 times a year. But over the course of the last year, we're seeing it less and less. Now we're down to 2, 3 times a year. And one sentiment that I'm hearing from more and more budget players regarding Historic Pauper is the desire to build one deck that they can continue to tweak every time the format comes up, but never really building a second deck for the format that just doesn't get played as much. So today we are going to be talking about 3 pillar decks for this format, any one of which would be a great one and only deck, but still allowing you to tweak it slightly over time and improve it as we all like to do. But before we get into all of that, this whole Midweek Magic thing has become a bit of a tradition here at the Stronghold, and it all started with our crack team of researchers discovering that we were the only YouTube channel making consistent, proactive, and timely Midweek Magic coverage. And here we are years later, and it appears that we're still the only ones out there doing it for the budget community. So be sure to subscribe to the Planeswalker Stronghold so that we can be here for you every chance we get. Now, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, right. Now, if you're new to Historic Pauper, there are a couple things to be aware of. First off, it is based off the historic format banned list, and this doesn't really affect very many common cards. However, there is one important addition, that is Persistent Petitioners. This card is just way too functional in this format, with its ability to gang block as well as tap to mill your opponent. One other important difference is Historic Pauper takes into account the rarity in which cards were printed, if you would, onto Arena, and cares nothing about non-Arena versions of the card. So something like Lightning Bolt, which is a staple in many of the Pauper decks out there, is not available in Historic Pauper. Not only is it part of the historic ban list, but it is only ever been printed on Arena as rare. Alright, so now let's get into some decks, and I want to start with the one that is probably the easiest to assemble with a minimal investment. That is the mono black Colonial deck built around one of Arena's original cards, the common Rat Colony. This is a 2/1 rat creature for 2 mana, and it gets +1/+0 for each other rat you control. A deck can have any number of cards named Rat Colony. It's pretty awesome. Basically, this is so easy to assemble because once you have 4 copies of Rat Colony in your collection, you can add as many of them as you want to your deck. All you really need for this deck is about 30 creatures, and again, any quantity of those 30 can be Rat Colonies. Then you need about 10 pieces of interactive spells, card draw, removal, reanimation effects, different things that might save your creatures in combat, stuff like that. And then about 20 lands, all of which can be basic swamps if you so desire. It's also important to note that Rat Colony has very recently been reprinted on Arena as a mythic. And as much as I like the art, 2 things to be aware of. 1, don't spend mythic wildcards when you can spend common wildcards. And secondly, you might have one of these copies hiding in your collection from the recent mythic reprint, and that means you only need to spend 3 commons to make this deck work for you. Next up, we've got a true classic in mono red burn. This deck, as its name would imply, is really built around 2 key things. The first being permanents that stay in play that somehow amplify the amount of damage dealt by your burn spells. A card like Unruly Catapult, for instance, is an 0/4 defender, so it makes a fantastic blocker to hold off those aggro decks. those early creature plays, things that might not be worth removal in their own right. But when you tap it, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Then you get to untap it every time you play an instant or a sorcery, effectively adding 1 damage to each of your burned spells. And of course, the other side of this is the burn spells themselves. For instance, Shock, 1 mana, 2 damage, with something like Unruly Catapult on the field. It's effectively just as good as Lightning Bolt, which is banned in the format. When it comes to your burn spells, instant speed, of course, is almost always better, and it's best to look for ones that can target your opponent or any target, so you can use them as creature removal when you need to, but can also go face to finish off your opponent because, well, that's your main game plan. This deck is very much a cornerstone of, well, almost any format because not only is the gameplay and concept very simple, easy to understand, easy to execute, but it can pretty much be built from almost any existing collection without the expenditure of any wildcards. However, if you are at the point where you want to make some investments in this deck, I highly recommend that you consider Skewer the Critics. Once you have dealt damage in a turn by, say, tapping that Unruly Catapult, now you can launch off your Skewer the Critics for a single red mana, doing 3 damage to any target. And last in today's lineup, and certainly not least, is the mono-white life gain deck, which is, well, very much a counter to the previously mentioned mono-red burn. It is built almost entirely out of the 2 cards from the Keep the Peace mono-white starter deck. And as long as this deck is distributed to new players, this will be a very viable archetype in multiple formats. The 2 Pauper stars are the Charmed Stray 1-drop and the Impassioned Orator 2-drop. Charmed Stray is a classic example of an early drop with lifelink that can start impacting the board and your life total right away. And of course, Impassioned Orator is one of those Soul Sister style cards that every time a creature enters play, in this case on your control, you gain 1 life. But hey, let's not fool ourselves, 2 cards does not make a deck. Luckily, almost any starter collection from any given year is going to give you some valuable additions. First and foremost, we want to look for additional creatures that have lifelink. This year's Outlaw Medic, a 2 mana 1/3, does that very, very well. It can block very well, having a 3 toughness. If they are silly enough to swing into it, you do get the lifelink, life gain off of that, as well as when they do finally kill it with a combat trick, you get to draw an additional card. Now, to tie into the Impassioned Orator side of the equation, we want to look for cards that put multiple bodies onto the table. This year, for instance, we've got Tinkerer's Tote for a 3 mana artifact. It puts 2 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens into play, which will trigger the Orator 2 times. And you can also sacrifice the Tinkerer's Tote itself to gain 3 life and possibly trigger some other life gain matters effects within the deck. Now, the mono-white version of this deck can almost always be built from any given collection, even day 1 starters, but is very often combined with either green and or black to give you even more life gain value. Now, that having been said, if you are at the point that you want to start making some upgrades, there's 2 to really consider. First, and possibly foremost, is the 1 mana 1/1 human cleric creature Soul Warden. This card is just ubiquitous within this archetype because whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. Please note that that does not say a creature you control. You get to gain life when your opponent plays creatures too. Now, as far as getting a payoff into the deck, the 3 mana 3/2 Celestial Unicorn is one of the best for Pauper because whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on Celestial Unicorn. And yes, if you have Soul Warden in play, when you play Celestial Unicorn, it comes down and immediately gives itself a +1/+1 counter, making it a 4/3 for 3 mana that is only going to get bigger. These are the first two upgrades that I would consider, particularly for Pauper, and even putting just one copy of these each into your Pauper deck will have tremendous benefit, as well as giving you these cards in a Brawl version of the deck as well. So there it is, guys. Those are my thoughts on 3 of the easiest entry Pauper decks. But I want to know what you think. What do you think about these decks, as well as what did you end up playing? Make sure to let me know in the comments down below, and let's talk about it. Because even if you are an old hat to historic Pauper, the conversation will help the new guys as well. And hey, just in case you didn't catch all that, Matt would like you to know that the deck list that we discussed in this video is going to have a link down in the doobly-doo to take you over to Aetherhub, along with a link to any other alternative lists that you might wish to consider. He only asks that you give it a little thumbs up when you're over there checking out the deck list. And I plan on live playing this event on Wednesday at 11 a.m. over on my Twitch channel. So definitely stop in and check it out. Because the Stronghold is so much more than just a YouTube channel, and you can find links to all of our other social media outlets in our profile. Because at the end of the day, we're all budget players. And as a community, we're stronger together. So like, comment, subscribe, follow, do all those things to show a little love. It's appreciated more than you know.